let's do this. Hey guys, welcome to the channel. My name is Jay Wilson. I'm a content creator over at Data Crew, and today I'm going to jump on the bandwagon and show you a DDX brick that I modified by from another developer in the community. Actually, I'll just say their name, Jace McLean. I don't know if he actually wrote this code, but he definitely shared this DDX with me. And I customized it a little bit, made it a little bit my own, and wanted to share it with you guys. So one of the challenges I'm working on with a customer of mine is they say, hey, Jay, we know in Domo you have this like left side nav, and I can see all of the things, but is there any way we can have a nicer navigation experience, especially one where maybe I can control the sort order, or maybe choose which pages I see on my dashboard, or on in the navigation bar. And so I came up with this idea, again, I was partnering with other people, and we came up with this idea of having a landing page where for each user, and I just happen to be logged in as myself, I can see the cards, or the pages rather, that I have access to, and depending on which user is logged in, they should see a different set of links. And it works, right? I have the ability to click a link, and it will navigate over to that page in Domo. Okay, so this is built on a couple things. It is built on a DDX brick. I will walk you guys through that code. I'll talk a little bit about how I rewrote the code to make it a little better, and then I'll also show some of the data sets that are powering this app, or this DDX. And actually, let's start there. So this DDX is powered by a data set that I've called DDX landing page. It has a couple required columns. So the text that gets injected into the actual DDX itself, the URL for the page I want to navigate to, what is the name of that page, and the magic that makes it all happen is that I have, for each user in this instance, I can pull up the cards and pages that they have access to. Now, of course, I'm only able to generate this report because I do have admin rights on this box, or sorry, in this instance. But ultimately, in order for me to create a DDX that shows you all the pages you have access to, I need to create a data set that shows you all of the pages you have access to. So if I were to filter this for myself, right, not only do I have a list of all the pages I have access to, but if I was looking at this from the governance perspective, I might wonder, oh, hey, Jay, how do you have access to this page? Is it shared with you because you're part of a group? Is it shared with you directly as an individual? How did you get access to this page? Right. Well, so in order to do that, this is actually flowing through an ETL. So let's work our way backwards here. I just have an ETL that's using another data set that's generated by Jupyter Notebook, where I added a rank function to change the order of the pages. And then I have a formula tile that is handling, how I do this div class header card injection stuff. Don't worry about it. That part is terribly interesting. But ultimately, I'm using an ETL to generate this data set. But how did we get this user access list? What code, what trickery did we have to go through to get all this done? So if you're not aware, Domo has the ability now to create data sets out of a Jupyter Notebook. So in our test instance here, we have our workspace set up. I have a workspace called Monet, and I have in this workspace a notebook that is ultimately going to export my data frame. Now, again, I'm not going to try to teach you guys Python all in one day, but what I did want to say is that I'm using a library called DomoLibrary that you can pip install, DomoLibrary. Let me just pull this bad boy up. DomoLibrary was written by Jay Wilson 07. Oh yeah, that's me. DomoLibrary was written by me. No, don't go there. Is this what I wanted? Actually, it is. It does what my goal is with this library is to build you an alternative to PyDomo that gives you functionality of PyDomo and more. And in our case, of interest to us is how we interact with groups, how we interact with users, and get this access list. This code is available on GitHub. This code is available in PyPy. So you could theoretically go and download it today, but let's walk you through what's. So I'm using, oh man, I'm using so many cool Domo features that you may or may not know about. I am using an account object called Domo Creds. And what that account object is, if we haven't seen it before, you know how in Domo, when you create a new connector, you set up the credentials? Well, you can also create what's called an abstract credential store, which is kind of like the equivalent of creating a .env file if you were coding in JavaScript, or .env file for Python, right? It gives me the ability to say, hey, I have this account called Creds, and I want to store username and password, or some secret sensitive information that I don't want just blurted out on the internet or just shared with anyone. In any case, I can create a Domo Creds object, and when I go to Jupyter Workspaces, I can share that with the workspace. So here I am configuring my workspace. I can set it to output, create the output data set that I'm going to create, and then also I can share any of these creds that I have set up in Domo. And I've already shared Domo creds. A username and password in it, so I'm not going to print it for you, but what I can do is I can say, hey, I know that Jay Wilson chose to store his username and password as a JSON string, which I'm calling .env or env. And then from the Domo library, I have this concept or this class called Domo Auth. And there's a couple ways you can handle authentication. You can use full authentication, which is username and password. You can use token authentication, which is you go to admin and create an access token. Or if you're using documented APIs, you can use the developer token auth. In my case, I'm using full auth, so I'm saying, hey, I want you to connect to Domo community using my username and password. And again, this username and password is what's going to be used to pull, give me a list of all of the pages, show me who has access to what page, and so on. Okay, so I'm creating an auth object. From there, let me work my way up. Yeah. So from there, what I'll do is I'll say, hey, I need to get a list of pages. I want to get a list of all of the pages that I have access to. So once again, from Domo library, I have a class called Domo Pages that will allow me to get a list of pages. I'll pass in the auth object. And what that does is right now I'm just going to print out my first 5 pages. It says, hey, I know there's this entity called page. Here's the ID. There's the title. And I can also see some attributes of that page. And again, I created this Domo page class with the stuff that I find myself using when I'm writing code related to pages. But if we need to extend it because there's some stuff you need, let me know, and we can add some properties to it. We'll talk though. When I'm playing around in the Domo library and I'm like, how does it work? Where do I go to Domo library here in GitHub. I can go to classes, and I can look at the Domo page class, and I can see, oh hey, there's a class called, where's my class? There's a class called Domo page, and it has these properties on it. There are code samples in the documentation if you want them, but let's just keep with what we're doing here. So once I have each page, I want to get the access list for that page. And again, the access list is going to be the list of users and groups who have access. And so for each page in Domo Pages, run the method called getAccessList. And y'all don't know this, but getAccessList is going to hit an API Which API? You don't have to know because I've taken care of that for you. But again, if you wanted to look, you can look in GitHub, or if you want to go to Postman, you can see the documentation that I've created in Postman to find out about that. In any case, for the first page, for that page, the access list includes this user, that user, that user, that user. And again, Domo user is another class that I've set up that has attributes like ID, title, display name, and so on. Okay. So then, now that I have a page and I have the access list, the users and groups that have access, I'm going to format that so the final result needs to be 1 row per page per user. No, 1 row per user. No, that was correct. 1 row per user per page. So I have a function called process page that's going to help us do that. And where's my process page function? Here it is. Process page takes a page. It takes a list of users who have access to that page and a list of groups that have access to that page. Remember, you can share pages with users or groups. I want to get some properties, right? When I create my 1 row in my data set, I want to have properties like what is the parent page, what is the top page, like what is it a sub-page of, and then additionally, who are the members of each group, right? Because if I just say, hey, group A has access to this page, it doesn't tell me which users are in that group. So I have to get the membership for each group. Again, one of the things I like about working with classes and this library that I've set up is you don't have to ask yourself, how do I get a list of members? There's a function that just does that for you. And so you can really just focus on writing your Python quickly. At the end of the day, our final result will be 1 row that has the instance I pulled the data from, the page ID and title, the parent page, the top page, the user ID, their email, and the group that they are a part of that gave them access to that page. Or if you did a direct share, this group name would be blank. And then I just use write data frame to output this data set. What I wanted to highlight here is like, this project took, I'm going to try and say an hour. This project took an hour to put together, right? I have a DDX brick. Okay, that's cool. I have a DDX brick that needs to be powered by a data set. Okay, how do I generate that data set? Well, I'm going to use Python to create my data set because I happen to know Python. I also needed Magic ETL, by the way, because Magic ETL has some things that it's really good at too. And so what's really interesting is to have this intersection of all of these little small pieces of Domo that keep on getting better and better that allow me to create a really solid experience for my users, right? I can have this DDX brick that is full screen. So if I go here to options and display mode, I can create a full screen display mode so it goes wider and doesn't have like the wide gutters on the side. Because I'm working with a DDX brick, I do have control over the actual JavaScript that's getting executed in the background. Oh yeah, we didn't go through this. Okay, so what's going on in my DDX? Well, I like to take a functional approach to writing JavaScript, and more importantly, I don't like it kind of like all bleeding together. So I'm going to teach you guys some JavaScript if you don't know it already that can help you reorganize your code and make it a little bit cleaner. So I like to organize everything into functions. So I have a function called setHeading, which if you can imagine, you pass in the username, you get the welcome element, and then you just inject the username into it. And that welcome element is coming from the HTML side, which is here. For my HTML, I have my class called header, and then within the header class, I have a div called welcome, and this is what I want to replace with J Wilson. So that's one function. But in order to kind of, I think a lot of the DDX you get, your functions just kind of bleed all over the place, and there's no real clear delineation between where one thing happens and where the next thing happens. And so what I like to do is I have down at the bottom a function called main. And within main, well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set the heading. Well, where do I get the username from? The username is pulled from the .domo.env. And if you're not familiar with domo.env, check the documentation. We'll have attributes like the username that's running, the email of that user, and so on. And we can use these properties in our app. In any case, I called set heading, where I'm going to pass in domo env username. Great. The next thing I want to do is get the data that I need to pull from my data set. Now, you'll see it as, you'll see a .then chain is the way I think a lot of DDX developers like to do it. They'll do .then. I prefer to do async await. And so what I'm doing here is I have a function called getData, and its job is to get data from this data set and to pass in my user email, run a query, and return some results. That's this function's job. So let's take a look at getData. GetData is an asynchronous function. What asynchronous means is like, I don't know when my API is going to give me a response. It could take 2 seconds, it could take 0 seconds, and it could take 5 minutes. Async says, hey, I want the rest of my code on my page to keep on running. And once I get a response from my API, go back and do some stuff. And so if you've ever seen, if you notice here, there's a lag between when the page shows up and the rest of this content here is available. And that's the asynchronous nature of your code execution. All right, so my getData function, what does it do? It says, all right, we are going to receive, or we're going to await till this Domo post function finishes executing. We're hitting the SQL API. We're running this query. And the part that I'm customizing is I'm saying, hey, I only want to return the rows where the user email in the data set matches the email of the user running my app. I suppose I could have tried using PDP to make this happen, but I thought this would be an easier way of filtering the results of this data set. Now that said, one of the risks is, right, because I'm not using PDP, my user could go straight to the data set and see everyone's access list. Is that a problem? For me, I don't care, but maybe for you, you do, and that might be a consideration as you're designing this app or this experience. In any case, I have an await function that says wait till I get my data. Once I have my data, then I'm running another function that takes the response from that API and reduces it into a series of, what are we reducing into? We're reducing into a list, a list of dictionaries. Okay. So let's go back down to my main. My main says, set my headings, great. Get my data, great. Once I have my data, I need to paint my app. I need to create my grid of all of the little boxes. So once again, I have a separate function called createGrid because I don't want my code bleeding all over the place. I want this to be a little bit more, we'll execute and test in chunks. I think one of the problems we have with DDX is we're like, hey, if my code bleeds all over the place, I can't test where stuff is breaking. Anyway, so I have a function called createGrid. What does createGrid do? Now, I'll be honest, I didn't write any of this part of the code. This came from Jace and the team that built this app. But what does createGrid do? It says it takes a list of rows, and we start by getting the container from HTML. All right, where is container? So over here in HTML, right, there's my welcome line, header ends, da-da-da-da-da. All right, so I have a grid. That grid contains a div called container, and then I have that manager view slider down here, which is going to be formatted with CSS. I need to put all of my buttons, all of these cards, inside of slider container. So I go over to what's ignore, okay. Here. For each row in my data set, right? So for each row, which is a list of pages that I have access to, let's start by creating a div element. And then we create some more div elements, and then here's the important part. I want to set the inner HTML equal to row text, right? Set it to, well, whatever I said that the text should contain. Then set some properties like the class name is cell and the ID is cell. These class name properties are going to be used, I assume, to apply CSS to box. And let's see if that's true. If I go over to CSS, do I have a definition for, I have a definition for stripe, I have a definition for grid, I have a definition for card. What you're looking for? Cell. Okay, so here's some CSS for cell, right? So when you're looking at your code, anytime you see them explicitly setting the class of a div cell, usually that's to apply CSS, and the same is for ID. Well, that's a lie. When I have a list of items in my HTML, best practices says you should be able to identify it. And so in this case, we're saying, hey, the ID is the cell plus the counter. And the counter in this case is going to be the row number. Okay. We're also setting the attribute equal to the row URL. Again, that's defined in my data set. Where do you want me to navigate to if I click on you? Then I append the box to the container, and I add a listener. What is a listener? A listener just says listen or wait for something to happen on my page. Wait for a click event. And when there is a click event, what do I want you to do? I want you to call the function domo.navigate to the URL. This down here is not utilized yet. This is the create manager toggle, and basically what this does is there's a toggle right on my app here. And the idea should be, as I toggle between this, maybe I want there to be a different experience. Maybe when I toggle this off, I want to see just the pages that I have access to. Maybe when I toggle it on, I just see maybe a different query, right? So what I would have to do is with my event listener, when I push the toggle button here, maybe I call another function, maybe I call create grid again, but maybe pass it a different set of data. Okay. So that's the kind of thing we can start looking at when I compartmentalize my code. I can recycle code. I could do something like, I don't know if this is actually going to work, but I could call get data. I would have to parameterize it so it accepts a different SQL query. Okay, I'm not going to do that. Anyway, so that's the app in a nutshell. I hope you guys found this useful. I hope this gave you an idea of how you can use different parts of the platform to make all this happen. Let's see, where do we start? We started with Jupyter Notebooks to generate a data set based off of metadata. Like this would usually be a Domo governance data set, but they didn't have one that met my needs, so I wrote my own. Then I pulled it into ETL to transform it into the shape that my DDX template was looking for. And then I went ahead and customized my DDX to meet my requirements to point at this dataset DDX landing page, and then we profit. All right, I hope you guys found that useful. My name's Jay Wilson. If you have any questions, come find us in the Slack channel. There's a whole bunch of people that are really diving into using DDX that were really helpful in getting me going on this, and I hope to speak to you guys soon. Catch you later, bye.